Hey, Doc.
Can you hear? Oh, you know what? Can you hear me
I can hear you
clearly or no?
clearly. I can see you fine.
Okay, because I don't have ear pods in.
That's fine. You can hear you perfect.
Okay,
We're
great.
live. Yeah, we're live. People are coming in the room.
Okay, great. I'm just gonna turn off my phone just because of
Okay,
Murphy's Law. Yeah,
I hear you.
good.
All right. Thanks for coming
Oh, of
on here,
course.
Doc.
Thank you for rescheduling. I'm sorry that last week was a little hectic.
Yeah, no problem. So I want to introduce you to everybody out there. We have people are funneling into the room.
Okay.
So I have with me a good friend of mine, Dr. Priya Banerjee. I've known her for many years. She's
Yes.
a board certified forensic pathologist, and she's going to talk to us pretty much basically about ME stuff. And we're going to try to take your questions too.
Hmm.
So a little bit
Definitely.
later on, yeah, when you in the comment section, all you're going to do is use the hashtag #AskTheME, and then we will choose those questions because the doctor has a limited amount of time and a little bit about it because she's very busy, as you can imagine. So we want to thank. I got a couple of people in the room. It's in the J Bo Nation, right? These guys and girls are fabulous. They've helped me get to where I needed to be so far to do
Nice.
live shows like this too. So Priya, let's just talk about. We have this mass fatality incident going on in Hawaii right now, and I think everybody has heard about it by now. It's kind of like died out in the news, but they did mention yesterday that they believe at least 115 people have died, and I think they said that there are over 350 people still missing. So we just want to talk in generalities, right? We know you're not there on the ground, so
Right.
we don't want anything specific. But the audience wants to know, like, what is the role of the medical examiner in these kinds of mass fatality incidents?
Well, I mean, this kind of tragedy in the US, I mean, Hawaii is a part of the US. You have to remember that, right? This is not a third world country. This is us. And I think, having it on an island makes it feel disconnected in a way, which, I think emotionally and logistically is very difficult. That I visited Hawaii earlier this year with my family at Oahu, not Maui, but that's because I didn't have time. It's such a integral part of our country, and now we have this devastating, I mean, the most concentrated area of Maui just devastated. And I think that's overwhelming to say the least. So on these islands, the normally crime is on the lower side. There's a limited population. There is more with tourism, but it's not the same as a major city like New York City or Baltimore, Philadelphia, right? You have to think about it. So the infrastructure isn't there. There's small medical examiner offices for the regular day-to-day stuff. Now, when this happens, you really need a national effort, which is what's been deployed. So DMORT, which is the disaster mortuary team run by FEMA, so our federal government, is on the ground there. And this is, an amazing volunteer group, really, of all sorts of forensic specialists. So medical examiners, as well as funeral directors, dentists, anthropologists, technicians. I mean, it's this multiple, it's a small army that goes in with the government resources to work on this. Now, that's how, I mean, they join forces, and I'm sure the local ME chips in, but remember, they have their day-to-day stuff too, right? The rest of the island is operational. And so that's where the challenge really comes in. You have this unprecedented tragedy that needs to be worked on. And remember, no one can have closure. No one can be buried. No one can be moved until, to a burial ground. Families can't have funerals until they're identified. So it's, I think multiple layers of complexity that come into play and add to the difficulty. In fires, people aren't recognizable, which is why this sort of process has taken longer. And I don't think people realize that. We know there's bodies, but how do you know it's who it is, and who it belongs to? So there's the process of getting records, medical records, dental records, to identify them. I mean, it is so complex.
And also too now, so I mean, if they have to use DNA to identify some of these people, they have
Correct.
to find those family members. So they did put out a list of, I said about 385 people, and for the I'm going to post there's information that they have. If you are a victim of this and you're looking for family members, this
Please,
is the
anybody here,
information.
just repost it. You never know where people are, and this is our country, and they can have relatives anywhere. So to connect people is just so important.
Right. So if you have people that are in Maui and that you can't contact them,
That's right.
there are phone numbers. I put them on the bottom of the screen so that people. So there's an FBI number, there's a Maui Police Department number, and there's also an email address that they have given. So that's very important. We want to make sure that if there's any listeners out there that have relatives, that
Yes,
they have the
definitely.
information that they do.
Definitely.
So
Yeah.
there's going to be a lot of DNA issues to take to identify some of these victims. What are some of the exemplars that medical examiners and forensic specialists would be zoning in on?
Well, I think when we think about it, obviously, we want to think about definitive modes of identification. So that's not just by looking at someone, and obviously, the body condition is probably not in a way to just look at someone and say it's Mr. Jones or Mrs. Smith. At that point, we have to go beyond, and so fingerprints probably aren't usable anyway because of the condition of the body. So at that point, we think about dental. Teeth are very resilient. They can withstand fires, and it's often a modality that I use. Now you have to know who the person is and know who their dentist is to get records to then compare to X-rays at autopsy. That's obviously another step, a logistical step. You have to connect the family. You have to find the dentist whose office may or may not be affected by the fires themselves, right? So
Yeah.
are the records even available? And if that doesn't work, we have to then go to DNA. That's really the final straw, if you will. That's where, and that's can be expensive, right? You have to collect the DNA. You have to again, you have to have a lead on who the person is. Otherwise, you're not going to have something to compare it to. I don't know if they've set up just like a database like NamUs, which is the National Association, or I think it's National Association Missing and
Yeah.
Unidentified
National
Individuals.
missing. Yep.
Yeah,
National
and
missing
so you
unidentified.
can do, there's ways to upload DNA. So if the family's missing someone, maybe they can upload a sample, and then when the DNA from an unidentified body is run, maybe a cross match will be made. And that would be the best case scenario, right? That at least the efforts are paying off. And I think, potentially, I don't know what, I'm not there, but I suspect there's efforts like this being done to just, get DNA done on as many unidentified individuals and see how it pans out. If the family can bring reference samples. So reference samples means something that their loved one has used when they were living that may have DNA on it. So hairbrush, but most often toothbrush. Um, even sometimes a glass. I mean, this from
Yep.
investigation, but
Pillowcase.
right, cold case. But anything that may have their DNA on it can be used to get a reference sample. So that's the known sample from the individual, and then see if it matches to the decedent.
Right, and like you had said earlier about the logistics behind this. I mean,
Oh, I
we
can't
kind of
even
we
imagine.
yeah. I mean, we can't even imagine. I mean, they're gonna have to fly things in, take things in on boats.
Right. And so,
They're
I mean, that's an added layer of complexity. I mean, when I was in Oahu earlier this year, testifying in a trial, actually, I just thought how difficult it was to even live there, because if you think about Amazon, right, something that we take for granted, or something that can be delivered from the mainland there, Amazon Prime's 5 days. That's expedited, a single small thing that you order for convenience, not something that are medical, that's needed in bulk, if you will. And you have to get that over from wherever, right? California onward. I mean, just
Alaska
adding
probably
the
too.
timeline to that, right? The cost, the time, and I don't actually know where the port is in Maui. So I don't even know if the fire has hindered transport of items, right, in and out of off the island, because I mean, I understand where Lahaina was, it was the big density, so I don't know if even the port system was, damaged in the fire or not. So the logistics just boggle my mind.
Yeah, and you think about it. I saw, we've all seen the videos and the photos, even
Correct.
the roads, right, where they were just
Yes.
strewn with cars that were burnt. So even for investigators and for to get this equipment there, they have to
Oh
like
yeah.
plow through all of these cars and everything. I
Yeah.
mean, talk about delays.
Right. And then where's that trash going to go? Right. Like if you're removing cars, you have to get those
Yeah,
disposed of to access the areas like you're speaking. That is a logistic. I mean, just the logistics seems so difficult. Obviously, things aren't in any. I mean, I don't even know the safety of some areas if the structures or the roads are accessible due to fire damage. You have to think about like
right.
stability of buildings, stability of structures, because they themselves, and then it's not just the fire, but the water, right, to put the fires out. So things are damp and, that's a humid area. Everything is sort of compounding.
Yeah, well, and then the weather plays a role in the
Absolutely.
recovery of the bodies and everything else,
Absolutely.
and the conditions and everything else. I mean, even if you think about these cars that they're all strewn, abandoned on these highways, they
Yes.
have to search every one of those cars to see if there's human
If there's
remains in
someone in
any of
there.
those cars too.
Right, right. Through the burn debris, and through your investigations, how unrecognizable that car parts can be. Like once a car is burned, there's wires, you don't know what that is, right? Things
Right.
can be melted together. So there could be a person, unfortunately, like burned with car parts around. I mean, it's just unthinkable. And I've dealt with those cases on an individual or maybe a few persons basis, but not in a mass disaster.
Yep. Viv just asked the estimate of how many people missing. They said about 385 right now. They just put out the list. That's why we had put out the number before. So that's think about that.
Right.
They
And I
have
think, I mean, that number is so, we've seen it grow, we've seen it come down. I mean, I think it's really hard to estimate accurately or approximate, right? Because I don't know. I just think, are people reporting it? Are people connecting the dots? I mean, I had heard up to 800 missing at some point. Now it's come
yeah,
down, thank God. But, you know, it's taken weeks now to do the 115. The
yeah.
other thing that I think about that's really hard is, are there even funeral homes that can handle, that can give the closure to the families, right? Like, okay, so we identify them, we figure out why they died, but then, there's religious and cultural practices and burying or cremating. I mean, all of these, normally there's a flow, right, that is accustomed for, but this is by far a huge influx. So, and I'm sure you don't want your loved one taken off the island to be cremated, right? So there's just that as well. Like, how do you respect these individuals who perished? Give the families the closure and still, um, give them their last rites as they wish.
Right. And like I said, the cultural differences, right? Because a lot of
Very
people as
much.
Americans, they don't
Right.
realize, there's a lot of things going on in Hawaii
That's
that
right.
is
Yes.
just not what happens on the mainland in
No.
regards to
Well. Right.
culture and ethnicities and everything
And
else that
proper
goes along with it.
practices, right? Like there's different like, because there's, I mean, I know when we went to Oahu, there was a huge Japanese influence, a big Asian influence. So I don't know even the religions that play into it. I can imagine there's multiple given the Asian influence. And so, and then there's a native Hawaiian culture and practices too. And you don't want to be insensitive to any of that.
Right. And especially in today's day and age, everybody has to try to make sure that they accommodate everybody and that
Yes.
no one's being left out. But like you said, they haven't updated the numbers in about 2 weeks, which makes you a little nervous because there's been a lot of turmoil between the mayor putting out
Yes.
information and the governor. So, all we say is that people have to be patient. Listen, Priya and I have both worked in mass disasters, and it can become extremely overwhelming. And the data and the intelligence that you get in sometimes
Right.
might not be accurate. So here's a great question
Exactly.
that we have. We have a great question here. It says, how long does it usually take to get the DNA result test back when you have something? I
Well,
know it varies.
it varies, right? And I think, I don't know how to accurately predict it in this case. So, in my forensic cases, I've had it back as early as a week. Okay. But that's with the lab next door, everything, reference samples available. Even when the tests are run, the tests themselves don't take that long, right? They can take a few days, but it's the flow of work and, how many identifications are in the queue, right, to be worked up. So if you're unfortunately waiting for a decedent 20th, that you think is your family member, you have 19 others in front of you, and I'm sure this is my example is way less than what's actually happening,
Right.
but I think that's going to impact. And I don't know, it's a lot of it because it's federal government as well. Unless you're directly involved, this information is not released. So I
Right.
can't speak of what is there a temporary DNA lab set up there, what resources they have. Are they like sending it back to the mainland where there's a higher capacity lab? Are they outsourcing it to there's Bodie and other DNA labs? People want help. And if there's certified forensic sites, they may want to get that help, but that's again on the mainland, not in
Right.
Maui particularly. So
Right.
I could think of many ways to facilitate it. I just can't speak accurately as to what's going on.
Right. And we're not talking about something like CODIS or a
Right,
database where we
right.
already have to match people up. They
Correct.
need to go and find these exemplars or examples, and then find the individual that they think it is, and test this stuff. So
Correct. So you actually have like a double number of DNA samples too, right? So I don't know if the question was based solely on working up the, like the passed away, the decedent's DNA, but you also have to do the reference, right? So you actually have, for one person, you have two samples that have to be run.
right.
So that it's in some ways double the work, if you will, right? You have to run, and all of those samples are handled the same way. It's the same analysis to get the profile. It's I can't say in detail where this is being done, but again, it's a ton of work to go about it. And that time then plays into logistics like body storage, right? You
Yes.
have people who are deceased and you want to preserve them even after the autopsy. There's just, 115 people have been identified. I'm sure they're looking every day. There's going to be a team of investigators, and maybe you can speak from field experience. Like,
Yep.
they're probably spread across the entire area. When we have a big area, it's usually a grid pattern.
Yep.
Maybe detectives are put on this block and this block, to break it up. But it's not just DMORT there. The investigation, as to where people are, and for the Emmy to even figure out how they died other than fire injury, you know, you need some more investigation as well. Are they found in their house? Are they found in their car? Are they found in the water? Like, we heard horrific stories of people trying to escape. So there's just so much going on. I see a question about the emotional toll. I can't
Right.
even imagine. I mean, I think I look at it as twofold. One is the people of Maui. I mean, I've heard, I don't think anybody really knows how long it's going to take to rebuild,
Right.
and all of these islands, tourism is the number 1 through 100 type businesses, right? That's what brings people. That's what is nature. That's what we enjoy, right? Both the locals, but I would say tourism's probably, as far as I know, the number 1 industry there. I've seen reports now of please come to Maui to the other parts, not the entire island is shut down. So that's interesting. But the emotional toll, both for the residents and the surviving family, as well as people like us or my colleagues and Joe's colleagues who go to the scene and work on this, it's traumatic. I think,
Yes.
we all
And you never get over it. You never
right.
get over it.
We deal with death, but something like this changes you. This kind of work, and I'm not talking about our day-to-day work, it's this volume of death and devastation is like, it's not like something I personally, thankfully not, been involved in my
Right.
professional career.
And yeah, unfortunately, I have with the 9/11.
Correct. Yes,
I spent a couple of years doing the sifting and the notifications.
that's
So
right.
Gretchen asked a great question here about family crisis centers and info centers, and they have that. They have that set up. I know they do. I know we did it in New York City too.
Definitely.
Um, yeah, and in New York City they had to do several different locations because of the sheer amount of
Right.
people. Yeah, thankfully this number is. I expect it to climb, but I don't think we're going to get into the thousands that initially people were talking
Right.
about.
And I mean, it's a great question. I think, usually there's like intake, like there's family response centers, they call them, or intake centers. Like there's people who are not necessarily doctors, but just other individuals volunteering with the group who will set up. And I'm sure the local police have tons of resources on the ground to, they want the information, right? Because any kernel of information, you don't know what's going to lead to identifying someone. And
Right.
so they want, people to come forth and, give whatever they can. But again, you have to catalog that, you have to disseminate it, like put it in a database. That's the unbelievable task at hand.
Right, and they always look there for volunteers, and then
Correct.
uh, yeah, we have an interesting question here because before I post the question, just remember that every one of these victims that they find, they treat it as if it's a crime scene, even though they
That's right.
know that it is it's part of this fire, the natural disaster. So someone said if they were going to murder their spouse and then they were going to try to hide it, right? So I'll answer this one because this is a police related question, right?
Yes,
You treat every death as if it's suspicious until proven otherwise. And then what happens is the police do their scenes, the medical examiner or the
yes,
medical legal investigator. I'm sure there's going to be coroners,
yes,
there's going to be a whole
yes.
bunch of people on this team. They will come in and they will do a scene investigation,
Hmm.
and then the medical examiner will do. So if the police find something that they believe is suspicious, right? I mean, we know. Just we'll talk a little bit about some just basic autopsy protocol, right? We have X-rays of the body that is done,
Absolutely.
right, to looking for things
Absolutely.
like bullets and
Oh yeah.
those kind of things.
I mean, anytime the condition of the body isn't pristine, what I mean is like where the person's recognizable, their skin's intact. I mean, the use of x-ray, and honestly, in these kind of settings, I would just x-ray everybody. It's better to just do it and not think about it because you don't want to miss something. They probably have portable x-rays and it takes just a few minutes to cover the entire body, and it gives you so much understanding, insight into what's going on. You can see the bones, you can see the soft tissues. Obviously, you still need an autopsy because no x-ray, no other modality is going to tell you if the person was alive during the fire or not. But it does help. It's a very, very important tool that we use. And then there's specialized x-rays like of the teeth or sinuses, which go into the dental analysis.
Right. And then, all the other things that go along with that even
Sure.
becomes a really important aspect of the entire operation. I mean,
Sure.
I'm just going to post here because someone asked for the resources, the resource center. There's FEMA has set it up,
Mhm.
and I'm going to just post it right there. If you guys want to share that information or you want to tune in, just copy and paste that. FEMA.gov/locations Hawaii. They have it on it that they've declared this as a disaster area,
That's
and
right.
there's all kinds of resources on there to help people involved in this incident. So, I mean, we're talking about a major thing. Like I said, not only that, it's major, but now you have the logistics on top of that.
Absolutely. The
You're
first
welcome,
day this
Gretchen.
happened, I thought, oh my God, it's that much more challenging because it's in an island far away.
Right,
And I was telling my husband, look how far we had to fly from the East Coast just to get to Oahu for a trial. It was 11 and a half hours from Boston. So just think, if anything needs to be shipped from the mainland, granted, maybe not the East Coast, but you're still talking 5, 6 hours from California. It was to Oahu. And oftentimes it's Honolulu and then they island
right.
hop over. I mean, and I don't know enough about like the weather and air quality, but I don't know if the smoke has like changed visibility for flying, all that kind of stuff, or even just the runways, right? Are they structurally sound for planes to land on? Because it's ship or plane. That's how you're going to get volumes of things in and out.
All right, so Shannon has a question. Says, how do you compartmentalize that much death in a case like Maui? So I'm assuming this is like the first responder kind of, psychological.
I think it's for everybody.
Yeah.
Anybody that's working it, whether it's police, DMORT. I mean, even if you volunteer for it, you can't say that it doesn't change you. And honestly, Shannon, I don't know that I would compartmentalize. I think because compartmentalize to me means, I don't know, locking it away in a way.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's appropriate because you're squelching it. You're not dealing with it. I think if I did, so honestly, I had a strong interest in DMORT. And because I have a very young daughter, I just logistically can't go away for weeks or months at a time. And that's what I fear, that when you go, you sort of get dispatched. It's pseudo military, if you will. You're a specialized skill and you get posted over there. You may not come back in the 2 weeks or the 3 weeks that they say.
Oh yeah, they're
Obviously,
definitely not.
taking a lot longer.
Yeah, they said the volunteers with 2 weeks, whatever, but they're going to be there a long time.
That's not, anyways, but I have a strong interest in it and I realize what goes along with it. When my daughter grows up, am I going to do it? Very likely. The issue becomes realizing that you're putting yourself in a very stressful environment. I'm privileged to have a very specific skill to help, right? Like if I don't do it, who's going to do it? There's very few doctors in this country that have the skill that I do, or my colleagues that are there. There's only 500 or so less than board certified forensic pathologists. And so I think I would seek therapy personally when I come back. And I'm not ashamed to say that, because you don't want it to
manifest,
handicap you long term, right? You don't want it to incapacitate you, but it's a huge stress. And to see that death in that volume is not something I've been immediately exposed to. I think it's death and fire remains are very difficult. They're very difficult cases. Personally, they stay with me because the body is so injured from the fire, I keep sort of going on because there's no easy answer to this.
Right.
It's very emotionally taxing. It comes with, whether you're police, whether you're a first responder, police, or all the way to the end, funeral director, I think everybody's affected and the family is beyond.
Exactly. So we have a great question here from Jake. He has to run, unfortunately, but he said he wanted to know what the difference between the manner of death and cause of death was, which is something that's confused.
I can answer that. That,
ground ball.
Right. This is a great question, Jay. And I'm glad that you asked it because it'll be interesting to see how these deaths are certified. Okay. And as a medical examiner, my main cause professionally, main role professionally is to determine cause and manner of death. So cause of death is why someone died. And you can think about a million reasons why, right? Everybody wanted to know why Jimmy Buffett died. Oh, it was Merkel cell carcinoma. What the heck is that? It's skin cancer, right? But it can be something like a gunshot wound of the head. Now, is that because someone took their own life? That would make it a suicide. Did the gun go off accidentally? That would make it an accident. Or was something bad done to them? That would make it a homicide. So, excuse me for coughing.
No problem.
So there's natural, which is natural diseases, nothing external. Accident, the most common ones, it's the unintentional outcome. Like I like to say car accidents, but sadly now drug overdoses are the highest. Suicide is intentionally taking your life by whichever modality. Homicide is death at the hands of another. And then undetermined is the one that is really out there because nothing is perfect. Okay. It's not like TV. It's not, we can try our darndest. And sometimes we just don't figure out what's going on. Okay. And so these are very complex cases where I can't decide between one or two or more manners. And that's when it's undetermined.
Right. And then it's when you kick it back to the investigators and say,
that's right.
Fine. Yeah. That's we
well, and that's,
we don't like those.
That's important to say. And I would love for you to speak about it, but generally my understanding is if I leave it as it doesn't negate investigation from further pursuit of investigation.
Right. Well, no, in the way we handle it in New York City, if the ME said it's undetermined as the manner of death, they kick it back to the investigators, and it's up to us now to give you
That's right.
the information. But there are certain police departments that kind of take it upon themselves to say, this is an accident. We're not going to be bothered. So the medical examiner can't say what we want. And that's kind of the argument. And I'm just going to go off topic just a little bit, but the argument with the Shannon Gilbert death in the Long Island serial killer case, right?
Mm-hmm.
The medical examiner said basically it's undetermined. The police department is saying it's an accidental. She drowned. And that's when you have this disagreement between the medical examiner and the police.
Absolutely. And the nice part about what I like to say is the independence of the medical examiner when it's there is that you can take a stand like that. I professionally have practiced in multiple offices, whether it be part-time or full-time, that have allowed me to state my opinion, and sometimes the opinion isn't well received, and that doesn't matter to me because it's, to me, my professional opinion. I'm not here to make friends. I'm here to really represent my best, educated opinion on the matter. So, and if the police don't like it, that's where we can sometimes come to a head, but it's not, again, it's we're all supposed to work together. And so I don't have the authority of police, right? I'm sharing my professional opinion. This is my component. And then that is, I hope it's carried forth, but I can't do more than that.
So you're getting some fans over here. Gretchen, what an awesome resource Dr. Priya is.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks for coming on live. Yeah, sorry. So we covered manner of death. We covered cause of death. And you had mentioned it before. Let's talk about it. You said there's only about 500 certified forensic pathologists out there. What's the difference, right? So what we know there's let's start off with this. What's the difference between the medical examiner and the coroner? We'll start off with that.
Sure. So basically, when I teach this and I talk about it, I say that death investigation is done at a state level. Okay. So every state has its own sort of model and laws that dictate how that state's death investigation is going to be carried forth. Okay. So with that being said, I can speak of like where I've trained and reside. We're medical examiner system. So there's a centralized or state mandated death investigation, and everybody's a doctor. So every medical examiner, forensic pathologist are used interchangeably, but it's still an MD or DO, right? A doctor who went to med school and trained for this. Coroner is first and foremost a political position. So they are elected. They don't have to be MDs or DOs. They don't even have to have any medical training. Okay. They don't have to even be nurses or death investigators. In some areas, the medical examiner is the coroner. But again, it really depends on the state and the, even county that we're talking about. But coroners, I mean, the worst case example I heard was a used car salesman in Kentucky because no one else wanted to do the job. Right. And it's a paid position. And so the used car salesman doesn't have to have any training to sign pieces of paper, but they're the ones who are certifying. The medical examiner puts their opinion forward, right? So there's a forensic pathologist that works for the coroner or they contract with them. And then the medical examiner will issue the report with the cause and manner of death as discussed. And then the coroner can take it or leave it. Right? Based on their investigation. So that's where it gets real complex. And if you don't have someone knowing what they're doing, you open a whole Pandora's box, really.
Right. And the other thing that people don't realize is that the coroner, like you said before, if they're not the forensic pathologist or the medical examiner, they don't do the autopsy. They have to,
not. No.
They have to pay for it.
Absolutely.
So that money comes out of their budget. So these things become like they don't want to do it.
Right. They're not necessarily pursuing every case. They have to triage which case is going to go forward. And anytime you're talking about government, the budget is an issue.
Right.
And
it comes out of their pocket.
Right. It's a political office and they have to go fight for the budget and they have to justify why was this case sent, not this case, or et cetera. So, you're going to get a variable quality of work. Some of them are amazing. You know, some of them are so knowledgeable and run a great office and have a great staff. And you have the other horrific end of the spectrum too.
Yep.
You know, that
we won't name names,
right.
But yeah. So, but here's the thing: like, so when people have been following the Idaho case pretty careful, pretty closely, is that you have a coroner is at the center of this, but everything was done by the medical examiner in Spokane.
That's right.
So, and that's where, so people were saying like, what's going on here? That's why I wanted to
So
ask that
there wasn't
question.
even a medical examiner close by in northern Idaho, so they had to go to the Spokane, right over the border.
Right.
But the coroner was so shady. She's a lawyer, a defense counsel for another.
Well, like I said, usually that
I don't know exactly all the nuances, but
yeah,
basically she's a defense attorney and she's maybe double dipping in ways that seemed less ethical on the surface to me.
yeah. Well, they're usually funeral directors, which I've come across.
Yeah, that's often true.
Yeah, that's often true.
It can be anybody. It can be anybody.
So here's a question for you, and it says, have any cases really stuck with you? Or that was like a case that you had to make undetermined and you just kind of.
There's a few, you know, I don't think I can talk about it because.
Right. Yeah, we won't name specifics.
You never know where the investigation, like if it's undetermined, in my mind, that means it could even be a cold case that will later be reopened. So I don't want to talk about these cases directly, but I can name a bunch of them pop into my head as soon as you ask that question. They're just ones that pediatric cases are often, you know, very emotional.
Difficult. Yeah, difficult.
Yeah, and I'm a mother too, but I mean, sometimes they're memorable just because they're pediatric cases, not because they're undetermined, you know.
Right.
And then there's a section of undetermined cases that I had fought for and asked, you know, really dug through, and I still couldn't come to the best, you know, undetermined, what to me was the best answer at the time. And yeah, so have I ever testified in a case where I was the original Emmy? Oh, I can't even count. I mean, I've testified over 50 times in separate cases. And then I do second autopsies. I do them. I've done them and I do them. I just did one a few weeks ago. And, you know, I don't want to talk about it because it is very fresh and going to go
active
to
cases,
litigation and whatnot. But yes, I play both roles. So before, just my background, I was the Emmy for Rhode Island for over 11 years. And because my mom got critically ill, I left my position to take care of her. And as I mentioned, I have a young daughter as well. So my family needed me in a more flexible position. So now I work for myself. But as I said, I still do lots of autopsies. I do them for different jurisdictions like Las Vegas, where I fly out and work for them as their Emmy. So I'm the primary Emmy in those cases. But when I'm home, I actually serve I do private autopsies. So those are maybe either second autopsies where the Emmy has done some work and the family wants even more investigation, more examination, or they may be cases that the hospital or Emmy just isn't going to do an autopsy, but the family still wants to pursue one. And then I've also done second medical like after the medical examiner's done their full autopsy, I still go back and do an examination. So it can come in many flavors, and I do handle all of those.
Right. And also in the respect of dealing with not only defense cases, but the prosecution cases and families.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, families sometimes, like, you know, if there's a suicide, right? If it gets the matter of death or suicide, and sometimes they want to fight that, right? Because whether it's religious reasons or what have you, and then this whole thing becomes a little bit muddied up in the water, and that's when you come in.
So I sort of play multiple roles. I can do a second autopsy, or I can re-examine the maybe documents and photographs of the first autopsy to see if my interpretation is any different to help them.
Right. And then you've also done, and if people are interested, I put your information in the notes section up here, including the Anchor Forensic Pathology, LLC. Your company's in there too. So if anybody wants to learn more about Dr. Priya, her information is in the show notes here, including her Twitter feed, autopsy_MD. That's in there too.
Yeah, and I use that 99% of the time for forensic work. Sometimes
Right.
personal fun things like football or something comes in, but I try to
Well,
maintain it. There's
I
just
think
such
you're
a
going to get a whole
fun
bunch of
thing.
new fans. You're going to get a
Yes,
whole bunch of
yes.
new fans after today, which is
I
good.
posted about the guy who was driving with the special cattle in his car and he got stopped in Nebraska, right? That's
Yeah.
sort of forensic because it was police work and it was such a
Well,
strange
sometimes humor
phenomenon.
helps out, right?
Yeah,
Sometimes
yeah,
humor helps out in some of these
exactly.
things.
You have to lighten it sometimes, you know? You
Here's a
do.
great question. Cold cases, have you ever done a body where it's been exhumed years later?
Yep, I've done just one because so I do a lot of volunteer cold case work. Again, that's usually looking at the autopsy, the scene photos, the investigation, but exhumation is very rare. Um, but yes, I have done just one case worth it. Uh, you have to jump. I mean, basically, you have to get so much legal paperwork involved. Beyond, I mean, not me, but the family and the legalities of an exhumation are quite difficult.
And
So
religious issues too.
religious, legal, you know, personal. I mean, there's just a litany of issues with it. So it's very, very challenging and takes a long time. Usually the attorney general is involved. So you have to have, not me, but the the interested parties have to have like a really, good reason, but it's a long slog to do it. So they're not very common at all,
Right.
and I'm sure there's Emmys that have never done it.
And the other issue that comes down with these exhumations is if there's no family or next to kin, then this becomes specifically a court issue.
Oh
And
yeah,
between the yeah, I mean, people think that we're just going to dig up the body and we're just going to retest it.
that's
And
right.
I try to explain to people too, exhuming a body just to try to see if DNA is left under the fingernails, probably,
No,
yeah, the chances of that is zero because of the way that the preparation of the body is
exactly,
done.
exactly.
You know, but and we still hear people trying certain aspects, but unless there is some evidence where this person died from the manner of death of a homicide and
Right.
not
Oh
the
yeah.
accident,
Other than
those are
that,
the kind
it's
of things.
very rare. I was
Right.
called by someone to do an exhumation, but it never went forward to do it for DNA, like paternity purposes or estate. And I was like, okay, it was in a different state, so I don't even have any kind of medical jurisdiction there, and I don't remember all the nuts and bolts because it didn't go forward, but it was very complicated. I said, this would be a very unique situation, something that I don't do routinely, but it's
Right.
not that I can't get a piece of tissue or bone for DNA. It would just, we had to make sure all the legal ducks are in a row to do it.
Right.
Um, I've dealt with a lot of unearthed, whether it's like construction or weather related, like historical specimens too. So we have, in New England, there's a lot of Native American burial sites, but even older farms and stuff, the history was that you would bury your loved one on property. And now when that property is sold, centuries later and is being excavated to build a house, they unearth skeletonized remains, and then construction has to be held, and then we have to deal with identifying, or is this, a crime or not? Who was this? So that's challenging, and I've dealt with that quite a bit.
Right. So here's an interesting question we could take in a couple of ways too. It says, let's. People always say, "How come it takes so long for toxicology reports to come back?" Can you just answer that question
Oh,
before we get into
sure.
this one?
Yeah, this is also like bread and butter forensics. So you have to understand, as soon as someone dies, even if they look normal, like they look recognizable, our body chemistry starts changing seconds after death. What I mean by that is, when we're alive, we go and give blood through our veins, right? We stick out our arm, a needle goes in, takes a blood sample, no problem. But as soon as someone dies, blood cells start breaking apart, and what was a reliable sample when we're living is no longer reliable because of the cells breaking apart, chemicals shifting. And so we have very specific methodologies. So we do use blood. Blood is the best, substrate in most often in autopsy. But the way it's run, the way it's analyzed, and we have to make like double sure. So we use two different types of machines, two different types of tests. So one's a screening, one's a confirmation. That's not done in living individuals. You just run the test. So, but for me to be sure that fentanyl killed someone and to put that on a death certificate, I have to be damn sure. And I need these tests to not only identify that fentanyl's there, but how much, or it could be a medication that the person was prescribed. Are they taking it in excess? Right? There's always new drugs on the scene, unfortunately, right? So it is so much more complex than any toxicology that's done when we're alive. So what's done when we're alive is just urine toxicology, right? So that's you pee in a cup because of a background check or employment. And does your potential employer care if it comes back? If it comes back positive, you're just cut off. They're not going to go through the expense and extra headache to say, oh, this is cross-reacting or this is a false positive.
Yeah. The person who gets caught with it or whatever, they have to go through all that.
They have to, right. But it's much more challenging to do that, whereas in forensics, the baseline, our practice is that thorough. So
and that's why it takes so long.
It takes so long, right? It's many more steps. The blood is no longer in the same composition as it is when we're alive. I mean, it looks like blood, but when we're getting down to very technical chemistry, it is different. Right. So there's different machines, different charts, different levels, different technicians, right? We have different we have forensic toxicologists that deal with this.
So in the second part of this question, so I guess what we're saying here is that substances that are typically injectable, how difficult is it to find those needle marks on the body? I guess it depends on the body.
It can be challenging. Condition. I always look, I'm cynical in a lot of ways based on my work. I say everybody's a potential drug user until proven otherwise, okay? Because whether you find drugs at the scene, whether the family tells you or not, you just don't know, okay? And some of the needles can be very tiny, like insulin syringes are very, very small. And they're designed to be used in a proper way that doesn't hurt, right? You're not jabbing yourself with a huge needle. But if that is used to administer anything, I might not see the hole. I might not see it. If I see a bruise, if someone is a habitual drug user, I will sometimes see a drop of blood or a track mark, because where it's, repeatedly injected. But you have to remember that not everybody injects drugs either. So when I detect them, I don't know how it got there, right? I don't know if it was injected, snorted, inhaled, eaten. I just know it's in their system. So I look for any little marks like that. But, and I've had weird stories where there was one girl who only injected in her armpit. So her track mark was in her armpit because no one, she didn't want anybody to see. So, you have to look everywhere, in between the toes, the groin.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up. I was going to say the in between the toes one. We had a case, and we didn't know, but the victim had shoes on and everything else, and then the ME ends up calling us back and saying that it's going to go down as an accidental overdose.
That's right.
And we found several needle marks in between the toes.
In the toes, right? Because
that was like the first time I heard about that, right?
Yep. So you just never know, but it's not 100%. I'm not going to say that just because someone uses, that you see it.
Right.
And remember,
fentanyl, you take nothing for granted.
So this day and age, it doesn't have to be injected either.
Right. And this is why I said, between the detectives and the medical examiners, that's why I always make the joke when people say, you're never going to believe this. I say, try me. You might be surprised because we've seen a lot of stuff, and you just say, you never say never, never say always, right? That's basically
exactly
what it is. Someone had asked him, Marianne had asked, how about underneath the nail beds?
I haven't seen that, but I
haven't seen that. But like I said,
so never say never. Themselves are very painful.
Oh,
okay,
God.
So I think it's not the primary choice of where to do it.
Right.
Most of the time where people inject are where veins are, right, or hidden. So I think if you run out of sites, most often people do what's called skin popping. They make like a bubble under their skin for it to absorb. I have not seen nail beds. Obviously, you would have to do it at the tip of the finger,
Yeah,
basically
that sounds
under the nail,
painful.
which is extremely painful. And I don't know that that has enough space to even take the liquid, like accommodate like the bubble that
Right,
forms. So it may not be a great area, which is why we don't see it.
right.
Honestly, at that point, even just putting it in your mouth, because the mouth has a lot of absorption, like it may be a great way to just put, liquefy it and put it in your mouth or through your nose. Like those are areas where there's a lot of blood flow and thin membranes where we can absorb drugs into our system. So
Yep.
again, I don't know about the
We don't
nail,
want to
but
give anybody any ideas either. So we gotta be
sorry.
careful. We want to be careful with that.
Yeah.
So I mean, we have it's the whole new drug scene and everything like that as that's becoming a whole absolute nightmare for the medical
Absolutely.
examiners.
Oh.
How many? So you said there's only 500 medical examiners in the whole country?
I think the number's estimated at 500 board certified. And the
Okay.
thing is, like, I hate to say it, I count as one of those, but I'm not working full time in an office, right? I serve other offices, but I also do my expert witness and I do my private autopsies. So I still do cases. I'm still active. So, but I'm not doing 300 plus autopsies a year. So it does, so even when you have them, it's not necessarily in the workflow.
What's the difference between being board certified and not being board certified?
So,
Like how
right.
many hours extra?
Oh, a
Like
lot.
how?
I mean, basically, to even sit for the exam, you have to go through a fellowship. Okay. So that's a year of intense training. You have to have a minimum number of autopsies and exposure and training. And then it's, the American Board of Pathology, my credentialing what body, they give a very specific test. So it's not, so I'm boarded by them in general pathology, but I'm also sort of what's called specialty boarded in forensics. So I can't even hold down a job without being board certified. It's within 2 or 3 years, it was a requirement to be boarded. I mean, I came in basically and got boarded immediately, but you have to be able to, like, so to be board eligible, you have to do the fellowship, but you have to pass it, and there's a certain level of rigor and diversity of information that you have to be knowledgeable about. And it really speaks to like anyone's credential, right? Like that you're validated as being an expert in the subject and going to court, that you are, I mean, because what I say or what my colleagues say has a lot of power. And so you want to take it from someone who is trustworthy and, that their knowledge is valid and they keep up. So it's not just about taking the exam. I have to keep up quarterly with, I just took a test yesterday online, that was 20 questions in all fields. So I still got tested in breast cancer and heart pathology. I mean, stuff that I don't even practice, to make sure that my knowledge base is still there. Of course, forensics was a big part of it. So
Yeah, Shannon caught this one too. Rigor, no pun intended.
yes.
Good catch, Shannon. So, how many credits? I guess. So, like, how long is this
Not a
program?
credit base. So I mean, my training is, so I went to college for 4 years, medical school for 4 years. I then maybe I'm a masochist. I did a extra year of what's called a medical internship. So I learned what it's like to be a living person's doctor. And I took care of all sorts of people in the hospital. So anybody who became an internal medicine doctor did the same year. I did the same year as them. So I had the same foundation. They then go on to do 2 other years. And it's funny because most people thought I would continue in that path, but I really loved pathology and I actually loved forensics. That's why I went to medical school. And so after that 1 year, I then transferred to Hopkins where I did 4 years of pathology. So I
So
did,
that's like 12 years of schooling at least.
yeah. And then I did 1 more year of the forensic fellowship.
So it's about 12 years of schooling and about 2 or 3 years of fellowships and internships kind of thing?
Well, internship was 5, 6 years.
Wow. So we're
So
talking about 20
it's
years.
8 years. No, it's 8 years of school. So college and med school are 8.
Mhm.
And then I did 1 year of internal medicine. And then, so it's 14. So 8 plus 6 of training.
Wow. Wow. So 14 years of this stuff. I mean, geez. Talk about dedication, right? And you get a chance to do something that you enjoy doing too,
Oh, I love it. It's my
which
calling.
is
But I think the good and bad of it is, forensics is now more in the limelight. But the people who do it on TV, even when people see me talk on TV, they see a snippet. They don't see the entire road. And I often get asked, like, I want to become a forensic pathologist. I'm like, that's a big undertaking. It's a lot of curves and a lot of hard work that don't almost seem related because it's such a niche field, right? Like I could have stopped and just go after Hopkins and gone on to do hospital pathology, which is more cancer and infection and those kinds of things. But that's not what I wanted to do. So I had to do even more training, another board exam. But I do believe this is my calling, so I love it. Like I wake up every day and I'm like, oh, cool, I have casework, I have this, I have that. There's nothing the same about it.
right. And this is where the problem comes in. We're going to be wrapping up in a few minutes, but I just wanted to make sure we got this out there. This is where the problem is because they have been for decades trying to get rid of the coroner system in this country and replace them with the medical examiner system. But for what you just described, makes it impossible to do because we don't have that many dedicated people to go to do this stuff. And of course, it's a cost to it.
And working for a government institution, whether that be at the county, state, or national level, whatever it may be, funding and taxpayer dollars. I mean, all of our work is, whether it be police, ME, is all coroners, all taxpayer dollars, and not a lot of taxpayer dollars. I think in Rhode Island they said it's $1 or $2 per person. When you think about paying thousands of dollars of taxes, it's not a huge chunk of it, but it's such a vital service. And then anytime you want to raise the budget, hire a new doctor, that it becomes this penny pinching fight, right? And so even if you see it as necessary, it's where are the government dollars going to go, and the politics behind that are complex. And the politics behind coroners, right? Coroners are political people, so they don't want to lose their job. So it's multifactorial there.
All right, we're going to wrap it up now. Dr. Priya, we are glad that you were able to give us this time. Yes, and like I said, I think they've already posted your stuff all over there for Twitter to follow your stuff. So you should be getting a lot more people.
Okay.
But, we're going to do this again in the future. But I want to thank you. You guys have a great day. Thanks, Doc, and we'll talk to you soon. All right, guys, take care.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.